Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, episode number 370 for the 22nd of November 2015. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. A nice overcast, cool, mild Sydney, Australia. Over the last few days there's been a heat wave, so this is a nice reprieve, a nice rest. Coming up on this week's show, we're going to kick off with an interview with one of my favourite skeptics from around the world, Michael Marshall from the Good Thinking Society in the UK. Marsh, as he's known. Now, Marsh appeared recently on the BBC on their morning programme, watched by millions of people, to put yet another nail in the coffin of that wacky, crazy, bizarre, ridiculous, where's my thesaurus, modality of homeopathy. Marsh is going to tell us about that and the government blacklist when it comes to medication in the UK. What's going on there? Michael Marshall from the Good Thinking Society to kick off this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone. Following that, it's Evidence Please with Jo Alabaster. Jo's going to be looking at the recent story of a mother so moved and concerned by the plight of her child with whooping cough. She actually put up a video online of her child with whooping cough to warn other parents of how awful this disease is. She got a strong reaction, lots of positive feedback, of course, other parents saying well done and this is an important thing. But my goodness me, the reaction she got from those anti-vaccination lunatics out there, those people who are very keen to undermine our scientific advancements. What's that expression? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Most of them really think they're doing the right thing. They think they're on a crusade. They think they're saving us all from the evil conspiracy of one world government or the big pharma monopolies or whatever it is. I hope they think they're doing the right thing. But of course this poor mother has been on the bad end of awful comments, awful feedback. We're going to hear a report from Jo all about this. We're going to hear the video too, this poor little baby who has whooping cough. And then we'll play a little clip from a recent ABC television program, The Drum, where they're discussing this topic. Following that, it's a week in science from the Royal Institution of Australia, www.riaus.org.au, an institution that certainly defends science and reason. Then to round off the show, it's Maynard's Spooky Action, yet another interview from the recent Australian Skeptics National Convention this week. Maynard's going to be speaking to a former Skeptic Zone reporter, a Vice-President of Australian Skeptics, Joanne Benhamu. Joanne Benhamu. She's a clinical nurse consultant, but she also coordinates clinical trials in radiation oncology. Wow, that's a mouthful. She's going to be discussing prostate cancer. What an interesting interview it is. I encourage you all to listen, especially if you're a man around my age. An interesting interview. Joanne Benhamu, a defender of science, of course. A big happy birthday to Dr. Rachel Dunlop, known to millions as Dr. Rachie, of course, who just celebrated her birthday. Well done, Rachie. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and have some of the divine, delicious, indescribable peanut butter slice Jo Alabaster and her family made for me. We had a little celebration, a little get-together just today. I got a big birthday coming up in the very near future, and this was a little quiet chance to celebrate that. And my goodness me, Jo Alabaster's peanut butter slice. Oh boy, I'm still recovering. But there's still room for one slice more. Well, I'm doing that. And I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. And joining me now on the line from Liverpool, as he does every so often, not often enough, of course, it's Michael Marshall from the Good Thinking Society. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Richard. Nice to speak to you again. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. And as our Sydney listeners might know, there's been a heat wave recently in Sydney, and right now we're on the tail end of it, so I don't care what sort of weather you're having in Liverpool, I would swap with you gladly.
Well, I don't think we'll ever have the kind of heat that you guys have in Australia. It's the warmest November ever, I think, here in Liverpool. It's sunny outside, which is nice, but it's also disconcerting about the long-term future of the planet. But yeah, it's not quite the heat that you guys are having, yeah.
Well, let's put the weather aside for the moment, Marsh, and let's talk about more interesting and probably more important things. Now, news has filtered through to us here in Australia about something called a blacklist, which I'll ask you to expand upon in a minute. But also, you've been out and about. You've been appearing on national TV. Can you put all that together for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that's quite exciting for us, really. This is one of the projects we've been working on with Good Thinking for, I think it's been about a year. I think one of the previous times I was on the show, I think I mentioned that one of the things we were really looking at, we had a legal team and we were poring over all the different ways that we could bring legal challenges against the NHS provision of homeopathy. So spending actually government money on our health service on something we know doesn't work. And in 2010, the NHS even said, we know this doesn't work. They've still been spending £5 million a year on it. So we feel that's a bit out of order. We were just looking at lots of different routes that we could try and challenge this. And one of the ones we came across is actually this is the one that's hit the news. And it's a bit of a technical one, but it could be really significant. So the NHS has a list called a blacklist, Schedule 1 of the drugs regulations. And on this list, you put anything that you don't want a GP to prescribe. So it might be this drug over here by a pharmaceutical company that's been proven not to be effective at all. Or it might be a drug that is expensive, but there is a cheaper one available elsewhere that's better. When it goes off patent, you don't want to pay for the expensive drug, just use the cheap drug and save a load of money. So maybe you put the expensive one on this blacklist. And there's things like that, and there's things like if you can buy it very easily in supermarkets or pharmacies and it's not going to be hard to find, it's very cheap, then it could go on the blacklist. So you can't get ibuprofen or paracetamol or something like that on the NHS, because why bother getting the whole health service to go through the bureaucracy and the admin of getting you a prescription, which you pay £8 for, which for something that you can go into a supermarket and buy for 20 pence. So there's lots of different reasons. And this list has got 3,000 different things on it. Some of the things are, like I say, they actually work, but they're not cost effective. Uh-huh. And so we had a look at the reasons why stuff gets added to this list. And one of them, if it doesn't work, it should go on the list. Well, we know homeopathy doesn't work. The government stated this for 5 years. So surely it only takes one reason to go on the list. So that should be reason enough. But we look at the next reason. Is there something available that's better but cheaper? Well, everything is better than it because it doesn't work. So it ticks that box. They were saying even if people really wanted their homeopathy, if it was put on this list and GPs couldn't prescribe it, would this stop anybody getting anybody's access to homeopathy? Well, no, because you can go into your pharmacies, you can go into your Boots and your Holland & Barrett and your health stores, and homeopathy costs about £5. Well, if you're on the NHS, if you get a prescription, it costs about £7 or £8. So it's actually cheaper to not get it on prescription. So we kind of made this case to the government and said, you've got this blacklist, you've got a duty under the European laws to maintain this list. We think homeopathy has to be on it. And this is the argument we've been making to them for since the start of 2015. And initially they said, well, we're not going to add anything to the list. We've got no plans to change the list. We haven't changed it for a long time. We're just not going to look at it. And we said, yeah, but legally you have to. And you can't just decide arbitrarily at a random point to stop doing your job on this list. Because if you imagine that you make one of the products that's on the list, you're going to be pretty annoyed that you're on the list and this other product that's newer isn't on the list. So it's going to be sort of like discriminating against your worthless product in a way. And we made this point to them and said, if that's your policy, then you might find that everyone on that list has a right to get in touch with a fairly angry letter from their lawyers.
Wow.
And so we made this point back. And the great news is that a couple of weeks ago, we heard finally from the Department of Health. And in early 2016, they've appointed a minister to look at a proper consultation on whether homeopathy should go on this list. We're going to be part of that consultation. The people we know who are experts in the field, people like Edzard Ernst and the UK's chief medical officer, those are the people that will be looking to get involved and share their expert opinion on this. And I think we've got a really good shot at getting homeopathy banned in GP surgeries. And as I say, it's not going to stop your average consumer if they really feel they need their sugar pills that aren't going to do anything. They can walk into a pharmacy, they can walk into a supermarket, they can look online and get their homeopathy. But it's the fact that it's going to stop it being prescribed on the NHS, and that is a huge, huge symbolic victory as well as a real victory. It'll save a couple of £100,000 a year, but the symbolism of it is so important that we're no longer endorsing this.
Absolutely. It would send a powerful message around the world, and I can almost hear the homeopaths screeching.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you looked at any of the comments on any of the news coverage, you'll have definitely heard of the homeopaths with a few things to say. Because as you say, I was on TV about this on Breakfast News, debating with a homeopath there, and Simon was on. Simon Singh, head of the Good Thinking Society. He was on the TV and the radio and lots of different radio, and we made it into every national newspaper as well. So it was really big news. I mean, you couldn't have missed it really if you were sort of paying attention to the news at all that day. And the great thing about that is it's because everywhere give us that coverage, because everywhere give us very positive coverage about what we were trying to do, it puts pressure on the government to do this right. They can't just bow down to any lobbying from homeopaths without following the letter of the law. And we think we've got a good handle on the law on this one, so we think there's a real chance. And it'll stop GPs prescribing it, which is one element of the funding. The other way that that homeopathy gets funded on the NHS in this country is through homeopathic hospitals, which we still have one or two of. We used to have 5. They're starting to close down. So in all of the £5 million that we spend on homeopathy in the UK, it covers about £110,000, which isn't a huge amount. But at the same time, our other work is knocking on the doors of those hospitals and challenging the funding there. So what we're doing is we're challenging every little bit of this, and this just shows it's another step on the way towards the NHS becoming homeopathy free and actually being able to sort of put its head up in proud and say we're no longer attached to this complete quackery.
Well, it's got to happen. I mean, there's one thing I've learned over the years of being in the skeptical game is things happen at their own pace, and sometimes that pace can be very slow and can be bewildering. I mean, if we take homeopathy as an example, it so clearly doesn't work, and it clearly cannot work if the laws of physics hold true. You'd think that it would be a quick death, but it's quite staggering how it hangs on, and there seems to be some sort of lethargy in officialdom to put the nail in the coffin.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in a way, I can sort of see why. I mean, the majority of the public don't really know what homeopathy is most of the time. Occasionally, it'll sort of come into view when there's a big story in the papers, or when a load of random skeptics decide to take homeopathic overdoses on the streets, and it kind of pushes the conversation into the narrative, into the landscape a little bit. But other than that, your average person just thinks, well, this is herbal medicine, it's natural medicine. I might not try it, but maybe other people should have access to it, and maybe that's not a bad thing. And those sound like persuasive arguments. So I can imagine that there are politicians who think, if I was to make a stand on homeopathy, how many people's votes am I winning and how many people's votes am I losing? And this is the thing for us is that when we were campaigning about homeopathy, when I was just doing this in my spare time and as a volunteer, and you know how your time can get quite limited, we did the 1023 campaign, and we had a little bit of local success on the NHS getting rid of it in the Wirral, just near Liverpool. But because we didn't have the time and the expertise to follow that conversation, we missed when the homeopaths lobbied for that decision to be undone. And because it was just the homeopath lobbying and there was no voice on our side, they were successful. And I think this is a big part of it, is that often when these consultations come up, or these decisions are there to potentially be made, skeptics might not see it. Or when they do see it, we might kind of go, oh, brilliant, the NHS is going to get rid of homeopathy. Fantastic. Yeah. But actually what we need to say is, the NHS looks like they're going to get rid of homeopathy. I need to send them a letter of support, because they're going to get 1,000 letters from people who want it to stay. So they need to hear our voice in this conversation, and that's why we're trying to be a lobbyist. That's why we're trying to put together a campaign or a project of good thinking to represent the skeptical voice and make sure it's a balanced viewpoint that the politicians hear. They don't just hear from homeopaths and people who use homeopathy. They're also hearing from rationalists who say that £5 million can go to a lot of good causes, can do a lot of good on the NHS if it's not going on stuff we know doesn't work.
Well, of course, we also have the situation, and the same is true here, that we have to be vigilant, because the other side are eager and keen, and they have many supporters waiting by their computers to send letters or to take action at the drop of a hat. So it's of course that's something we have to bear in mind, not only with homeopathy exactly, but especially with things like the anti-vaccination crowd and things like that. But just getting back to this TV appearance, I was pretty impressed, Marsh. I thought you did pretty well. What was the name of that show?
So that was BBC Breakfast. I mean, that's the flagship TV programme for the BBC in the morning. It's watched by like 6 million people live, so it was a very, very bizarre situation. I kind of found out the day before that I was going in, and I thought, oh God, can I really do this? Am I going to bottle this? But it was fun. It was a bizarre situation, but it was an awful lot of fun. It was nice to be able to put forward our reasoning, because so many people will try and paint us as like, oh well, these are big evil skeptics and they're probably being paid by Big Pharma and they want to take away, they want to take away your choice. And we were able to say essentially that just at this country, I mean, the British Medical Association, the junior doctors have had their pay cut very recently, and they're about to go on strike. I think next week there's going to be the first strike on the NHS, full strike in very, very many years. So I was able to say, take £5 million away from homeopathy. What can you do with that money? Well, you could give it to the junior doctors, for one. For people who think 5 million is not much, tell that to the people who haven't gone on strike because they're having their pay cut. Yet we're financing something we know doesn't work. So I was able to put those arguments across, which I thought was very valuable to get the message out there.
I think so. And what I'll do, folks, is I'll link to the video of Michael Marshall on that show in this week's show notes, or you can just Google the name of the show and Michael Marshall. I'm sure it'll come up in YouTube. But it was quite a good performance, and the man you were pitted against was interesting. This one thing that really took me when I was watching it is when he was claiming yes, there is minute particles or the substances in the homeopathic preparations, and I'm thinking, no, there's not. Does he know what he's talking about?
The other question is about, do they have nothing in them? Actually, the majority of homeopathic medicines on sale in the high street pharmacies do contain, small amounts admittedly, but they do contain the substance that's on the label.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, I think, and it's hard to know. I mean, obviously you're under a lot of pressure. Maybe he made an error of judgment. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, I mean, he certainly knows what he's talking about, because he was labelled, as he came up on screen, as a consultant rheumatologist, but the job titles they failed to mention was that he's the clinical director of the London Homeopathic Hospital, and he's the homeopath to the Queen. So they didn't mention his deep-rooted career in homeopathy when they put his job title up. But yeah, so I was pointing out, because the thing is, all the way through the morning as they were trailing this on TV, they were saying, well, it's about taking a little bit of something that would cause an illness to get rid of an illness. So it said it's like taking pollen to cure hay fever. So when I went on, the first thing I said was, well, we need to know what we're talking about. This is substances that have got nothing at all in them, these treatments. They're just sugar pills. There is no pollen in the hay fever tablet. There's no sulfur in the sulfur tablets. They're just sugar pills, which I think is a very key point to get across.
And it's a point we have to keep making, because many people out there in the media too are under the impression that homeopathy is small doses of something or other. And yes, we have to keep hammering the fact that no, it's no dose. It's nothing. It's void.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of the homeopathy lobby groups, the homeopathy industry bodies, want to keep that confusion alive. So they won't outright lie, because that would be very, very unwise of them. But what they will say is that, well, we take minute doses and they're very diluted, but they won't say how diluted. They won't tell you there's nothing in it. And this is the reason that I think that's such a powerful argument for skeptics, because the moment that you start pointing out there is nothing in homeopathy, the homeopaths have got one of two choices. One is to say, well, of course there's nothing in it. It all works on the energies and vibrations of the water, of the memory, of the sugar. And everyone goes, sorry, what? No, that sounds like nonsense. Or they have to pretend that there's something in it. And this is something that happened when I was talking to Peter Fisher, the Queen's homeopath. He said, well, actually, the majority of homeopathic remedies on sale do have something in it, albeit small amounts. Now, that simply isn't true. I don't know where he's got that information from. I mean, I looked across the big homeopathic retailers, people like Nelson's. The majority, I've actually done a quick analysis of what they sell. The majority of them simply have nothing in. I mean, because you have the anything below 12C, the Avogadro limit, might still contain something. So if it's typically you'll buy remedies that are 30C or above. Sometimes you'll buy 6C, which is one with 12 zeros after it. That's how well diluted it is. It's not past the Avogadro limit, so there may still be something in it, tiny amounts. But the thing is, most places that sell homeopathy, of 40 different homeopathic treatments, 30 of them will be 30C or above, and they might have 10 6C ones. So even just looking at it like that, the majority certainly have nothing in it, and that's a very untrue statement that Mr. Fisher or Dr. Fisher made during that interview. And it's unfortunate I didn't have the chance to come back on that, because you don't want to get in a tit for tat, basically.
Well, and it's also something I've learned after many years of doing this too, is that when you're in a situation like that and then you're having some sort of media debate with somebody and you know the points and you know what you're saying is backed up by the evidence and they make an outrageous statement, you can't always nail it. You cannot. And you can lose sleep thinking, why didn't I say this? Why didn't I say this? Sometimes you do. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. So you make a choice about what you're focusing on, and the point that I focused on, which I think is also a very good argument to use, is that we're talking about something that for 5 years at least, the NHS, the government, every scientific chief science officer, the British Medical Association, they've been unanimous that this stuff doesn't work. So the NHS has said this thing does not work, and yet we're going to spend £5 million a year on it since then. Now, the point I was making on the show was that if what we were talking about was a pharmaceutical rather than homeopathy, there would be nobody defending that. Not one person would come on and say, well, actually, I think we should have a good look at the evidence and maybe people should be allowed to choose it and maybe we should have it there until more studies done. No. There's no way in the world you'd allow a pharma company to put a drug on the NHS and spend £5 million when the NHS has looked at the evidence and says it does not work. We'd be outraged by this, but because it's called homeopathy, because it's got this special privileged status, we like to say, well, it's patient choice. Well, patients have a right to choose between things that work. It's deceitful or certainly incredibly misleading to give patients a choice of two different things, and one doesn't work, and you don't tell them which is which. That's not informed consent. It's not patient choice. That's a fool's choice. It's a broken choice.
It is. Well, if I might use a Liverpool analogy, it's a long and winding road, Michael. It really is.
Well, actually, there's another big thing going on with homeopathy at the moment. So I mentioned that this blacklisting will prevent GPs prescribing, but that's only one slice of the funding. The other way that we're challenging the funding is to look at every little bit around the country and to see whether the way that they justify funding actually plays by the rules. Is it actually lawful? And so I think I was on the show a little while ago talking about this big thing we've managed to achieve in Liverpool, where we'd challenged the local health service to say, you've made this decision to spend money on homeopathy. The way you've made this decision does not go by the books. We're going to take you to court unless you rescind the decision. And they said, actually, can sort of see what you mean. We'll rescind the decision and have that consultation open. And we've been in touch with them to make sure we can see how that consultation is going to be designed. That consultation is now open, and it's open until December 22nd. So it means that, again, this is an opportunity for sceptical voices in Liverpool. And if there's any sceptical voices in Liverpool who don't already know about the Merseyside Skeptic Society but do listen to this show, I will be frankly disappointed in you listeners. But yeah, so people in Liverpool can answer. I think even if you're in the UK, you can take the survey. Now, it might well be that at the end they say, well, we'll just look at the ones in Liverpool, and you'll spend 2 or 3 minutes filling something in that isn't helpful. But the flip side is they might look at it and say, well, the majority of these are in Liverpool, so we'll weight them. But these other ones over here have made some very good points. So it might still be worth UK listeners dropping over to the survey and just filling that in, because it really can't harm, because I guarantee there are homeopaths all around the UK offering their thoughts on that survey. So hopefully this is the first big opportunity we've got to follow through our legal action and push homeopathy onto the agenda and off the NHS, if it can't be lawfully justified. So there's a real opportunity here, and this is the first of what we'll do in each different region that funds it until we either get rid of it or until they can finally find a way of saying, actually, our decision is completely legal, completely lawful. As far as we can tell, I can't see a way that it can be, but you never know how these things go. But this is certainly a really great and very strong opportunity for a real success here.
That's fantastic. So what can our listeners do? Should they run to your website if they haven't done already? How else can they help you?
Well, I think the best thing to do there is there's two things they can do. If you go to the Merseyside Skeptic Society website, we've got a statement up there about this consultation, because obviously it's a Liverpool thing. We want to keep it with the community group, and Good Thinking, who I work for, is obviously supporting the MSS, who I co-run. So it's a slightly odd thing having a foot in both camps, but it's a fortunate thing.
I know what that's like.
Yeah, so if you go to merseysideskeptics.org.uk, you'll see a statement there about what you can do with this consultation, this survey. And the other thing that we need in terms of good thinking is help funding our work. So obviously this has taken a lot of my time over the last kind of year, like literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours by this point over the last kind of year, 18 months, to get to a point where we've got this foothold. And it's taken legal consultation as well. So any listeners who appreciate the work that we're doing and think that homeopathy shouldn't be on the NHS in Liverpool, in the whole country, and want to do something to help, then certainly helping us out with a bit of funding would be absolutely phenomenal. And the way to do that is to go to goodthinkingsociety.org/donate, and you can either throw some money in as a one-off, or you can set up a small monthly donation, and that funds all of our work, and it's really one of our very few sources of funding, and it's the kind of thing that'll keep us going, doing the work we've been doing and the work I've been talking about on this show when I appear semi-regularly. It'll keep us going for a lot longer. So yeah, that'll be a huge bonus for us. That would really, really help.
Goodthinkingsociety.org, folks. Head there, goodthinkingsociety.org/donate. That's what I'd like all Skeptic Zone UK listeners to do. In fact, folks, wherever you are around the world, certainly would recommend a visit to goodthinkingsociety.org, where you can find out more. Marsh, it's been a great pleasure once again to have you on the show as a semi-regular sort of contributor, which I'm quite pleased about. Please give my best to Simon Singh and family.
I will do, absolutely.
He's a top bloke, and as I remind him every time I see him, one of the best books I have ever written on any topic ever was his code book. It was superb, because even somebody like me, after reading that book, I understood how the Enigma machine worked. And if anybody can explain that in such a way that people like me can understand it, that says enough, I think. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, when you read Simon's books, he's got that knack of making complicated things seem straightforward and easy, and that's it's a real talent. So yeah, working with Simon's always been a pleasure, and the work we're doing is great, and it's always a pleasure speaking to you as well, Richard. I love being on the show.
Thanks, Marsh, and I hope we'll catch up in the not too distant future.
Thank you. I hope so.
Want to help support the Skeptic Zone and look pretty damn stylish while you're about it? Visit Mr. Cat's Origami Jewellery. Go to www.skepticzone.tv and click the link, or simply Google Mr. Cat's Origami Jewellery, also on Facebook. Pendants, earrings and cufflinks. Support Mr. Cat. Support the Skeptic Zone. What we want is some more evidence, please. Here's Jo Alabaster.
Hello, this is Jo Alabaster. The mother of a 4-month-old boy with pertussis uploaded footage of her son coughing onto Facebook with a passionate plea for people to vaccinate.
Okay, baby. It's okay. Boy.
Rebecca Harriman of Brisbane posted the video a week ago on the 14th of November, alongside her thoughts as she cares for baby Austin. It has since had over 1.5 million views and 32,000 shares, with news stations and sites around the world picking up the story. Alongside hundreds of supportive messages, Rebecca has also received many from anti-vaccinationists. who, on top of criticising her support for vaccination, have been causing her trouble by reporting a family portrait on her Facebook page for nudity. All this as baby Austin was being taken back to hospital. She has since locked down her Facebook page so that she can concentrate on her family, son and his health. The media coverage on this has, fortunately, been incredibly positive, a huge contrast from the days of false balance on the topic of vaccination. As a demonstration of the calibre of discourse in the media, I'd like to play for you this segment from ABC's current affairs panel show, The Drum, which played on the 17th of November and was hosted by Julia Baird, featuring Michael Cooney, David Miles and Sunanda Cray, with guest Lee Sales.
Anti-vaccination activists have bombarded an Australian woman with messages and attacks after she posted a Facebook video of her son suffering from whooping cough. Rebecca Harriman from Brisbane wrote, "For those of you sitting on the fence on whether to vaccinate yourself and your kids or not, maybe this video will convince you." The clip has had over 500,000 hits. In addition to supportive messages, Rebecca has received hundreds of abusive posts for criticising anti-vaxxers. And she's now set her Facebook settings to private to focus on her son's health, who's now back in hospital at the last time of writing. What do you make of the power of such a personal story, Sunanda, in all of this?
Well, humans relate to personal stories, don't they? And, scientists are normally very critical of what they call anecdata, which is, my son did this or my father did that, so therefore such and such. And they say that, we should look to the scientific findings and the research data. But in this case...
Is anecdata derogatory then, shouldn't we?
Anecdote and stick to it. Anecdata is definitely a derogatory term. Okay. But in this case, the anecdata is doing the work of the scientists. It's convincing people that there is a problem here and that the consequences are really serious.
It's really fighting fire with fire, isn't it? I mean, what you've got from anti-vaxxers over time is precisely kind of emotive rubbish designed to distract and disturb people and get them to do the wrong thing by their kids. And here's a case of someone fighting back, essentially. Which is terrific and to be applauded. It's fantastic.
What do you think, Lee, of seeing this video of this kid almost choking and kind of going blue with something that is preventable?
Look, it disturbs me when people put their faith in things other than reason, evidence and science. And the anti-vaccination view is not supported by science. So, please, people, do not sign up to that nonsense. There's this false correlations that they draw where they say, well, rates of vaccination have increased and so have rates of autism. Well, so have rates of breastfeeding. So let's say it's breastfeeding that's causing autism. It's just nonsense.
The number of motor vehicles on the road has increased dramatically over the years, and I don't think that's linked to autism either. And in fact, vaccinations and autism has been disproved.
That's exactly right.
So many times now that people keep saying it, from one study that was discredited and the person was removed from any medical register as well. So
plus, what sort of person, even if you disagreed with their views, sends an abusive message to a woman whose child has whooping cough? I don't care what you actually think about her views. Her child has whooping cough. Just leave it alone.
And she hasn't slept for 3 weeks. She's sitting up all night. I mean, that kind of anxiety.
I think good on her for putting it up there. It is an example of what happens when people don't vaccinate their kids. So it is very, very clear what happens. And, I've said it before, I'll say it again. A failure to vaccinate your kids is a form of child abuse. Vaccinate your kids.
You think it should be illegal, don't you?
Yeah. I think vaccination is a very, very sensible thing to do. We put fluoride in the water. We've got very good reasons for doing so. We're doing everything that we can, or governments are doing everything they can to try and make sure people vaccinate their kids. There's no jab, no pay now. The things that Scott Morrison did as minister to remove religious exemptions, I think, is fantastic. Conscientious objection is gone. It's only medical reasons are the only reason you can avoid a vaccination legally.
Right, and some of them probably hate the former Abbott government for, in their view, they would see it as denying the climate change evidence. Well, I'm sorry, you can't have it both ways. So if you believe the science on climate change, then you need to believe the science on vaccination as well. So
Right, and I wonder if it also hit a nerve because there has been so much whooping cough.
Yeah, what do you need? Something like 92 or 95% vaccination rates to get herd immunity. And in some areas of Sydney, it's down around 85. It's lower in other areas. The far north coast, there's quite scary low vaccination rates. So
little babies aren't protected, is the place,
on the far north coast, they talk about whooping cough season. If that is not abuse of children, I do not know what is.
Okay, we're going to leave it on that Strong note there, David. That's it for the drum. Thanks to our panel, Michael Cooney, David Miles and Sunanda Cray, and our special guest, Lee Sales. Our website has more, as always, at abc.net.au/the drum. We'll be back again tomorrow night. We'll see you then.
Oh, this is fantastic. Primetime television is featuring conversations on the importance of making evidence-based health decisions, correlation not being equal to causation, herd immunity, the cherry-picking nature of some anti-vaccination campaigners accepting the science on climate change but not the science supporting vaccination. Not a second is being given to hearing the false claims of anti-vaccination advocates, only condemnation of their views and their behaviour. 5 days ago, a whooping cough alert was issued for Brisbane following a spike in reported cases. There is also an alert in Ipswich with 4 infections confirmed in young children, some babies, in the past month. Just a reminder that pregnant mothers are recommended to receive pertussis boosters in their 3rd trimester, which can help protect newborns by a conferred immunity during those first few months of life when a baby is too young to have received the full 3 doses of pertussis vaccine. It's also worth chatting with your GP and seeing whether you're due for a booster vaccine, especially if you're welcoming a new addition to your family or are likely to be around any precious newborns. Our thoughts are with the Harriman family, and we hope that baby Austin's recovery is going well. For more evidence, please visit my blog at evidenceplease.net or catch up with me on Twitter at Jo Alabaster.
Welcome to A Week in Science from RiAus, bringing you the science you need to know. Zahir Khan, Jimmy Anderson and Damien Fleming are masters at swinging a cricket ball in the air, and they've got the differences between smooth and turbulent airflow to thank for their prodigious abilities. When travelling through the air, a cricket ball will want to move towards the side which has the more turbulent airflow. Let me explain why. To swing a cricket ball conventionally, the seam is angled to one side, meaning that as the ball flies through the air, the smooth side of the ball causes smooth airflow. But the seam trips up the air and causes turbulence on the other side. The turbulent air stays close or attached to the ball for longer than the smooth laminar flowing side. This causes a difference in pressure on each side of the ball, with less pressure on the turbulent side, making the ball move towards the seam. The maximum amount of side force is generated at a bowling speed of around 70 miles per hour. What happens above that? Well, that's when we start getting reverse swing. Above 85 miles an hour, the air doesn't need interference to start becoming turbulent on the surface of the ball. In this case, the seam of the ball makes the already turbulent air even messier. This extra messy air will actually detach from the surface quicker than the mildly turbulent air on the other side, causing the low air pressure to be on the opposite side and the ball swinging away from the seam. And if the ball is being bowled with the seam straight, the same forces are in play, but using the smooth and rough sides of the ball to create different airflows on each side. And now, 4 fast facts about the science of sports. This is a slightly different effect to swinging a soccer ball, where the horizontal rotation of the ball creates differences in air resistance and attachment on each side. Baseball pitches curve the same way to a soccer ball. The rotation of the ball in one direction causes the difference in air attachment. Facing a fast bowler, a batsman has around half a second to assess the trajectory of a ball, choose a shot and play it. And if you're as sick as me seeing a bowler bowl repeated no balls, if they move their foot 15 centimetres backward to remove the chance of a no ball, their apparent speed to the batsman would drop by around 1 kilometre per hour. That's it for this Week in Science. For more information on the science of cricket, go to the RiAus website, riaus.org.au. Follow us on Twitter at RiAus and like us on Facebook. I'm Ben Lewis and we'll catch you next week.
Hello, Richard and all the listeners of Skeptic Zone. My name is Ran Levy, and I'm the producer and co-host of Curious Mind. It's a podcast about science, technology, and history at www.cmpod.net. Each episode will bring you interesting stories from a wide range of subjects, from physics to astronomy and medicine, from arts to science fiction. We strive for the highest production values both in content and in delivery. We already have on the air episodes about German U-boats in the Second World War, about the history of X-rays and the war of currents between Tesla and Edison. Come and have a listen. www.cmpod.net.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
Here's a Skeptic Zone favourite. It's Jo Benhamu. Jo Benhamu. How are you, Jo Benhamu?
Hi, Maynard. How are you?
Pretty good. How's your sexy research been going in Melbourne?
It's fantastic.
You're working in a really interesting side of science at the moment.
Well, I'm working in radiation oncology. And specifically I'm running predominantly trials in prostate cancer.
Right. Which, as I said, sexy in the term is like it's something that's really relevant and really important. And do you think there's enough work gets done in that area or not?
Well, I mean, I think one of the two areas that get a huge amount of attention in research generally in oncology are breast cancer and prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. And typically in the past, I think prostate cancer less so because I think breast cancer being, predominantly suffered by women, it had a lot more attention through a lot of the breast cancer advocacy groups. But nowadays with groups like Movember, prostate cancer and men's issues, I think, are becoming much more...
Yeah, but it also means that every November there's guys getting around they're in a bad porn film.
Looks like someone out of a porn movie or Mexican actor or
Mexican wrestler.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, that's the only downside of it. Can we get into the controversial factor of the PSI rating? PSA rating. Sorry. Yeah. Now there's been conflict over whether you should pay attention to them or not, or whether you should get one early and get a base rate. Yeah. What's the scientific thinking on the PSA at the moment?
Okay. Well, I mean, I can't make recommendations because I'm not a doctor.
She's not a doctor, so don't listen too closely.
No. But I can tell you, yes, there is a lot of controversy around PSA testing. And in fact, really the way I think people should look at PSA, and for people who don't know what it is, PSA is prostate-specific antigen. It's a biomarker that can be tested in a blood test. And if a PSA is elevated, it can be an indication that someone has prostate cancer.
Right, so does that mean you have to go right prostate out?
Not necessarily, no. The thing is that it's also, the PSA can also be raised if you have something called benign prostatic hypertrophy, which is where a man gets a very enlarged prostate, or if you've had a urinary tract infection. So there can be lots of other pathophysiological conditions that can result in PSA being raised. So simply having a high PSA doesn't mean you've got prostate cancer, but it's a good marker for the fact that, the PSA's up, we need to have a look at what's going on.
We've got something better than PSA on the horizon?
Well, we do, actually. Funny you should say that.
Because that's what I was asking.
Yes,
because I've got a prostate.
Yes, well, and a lot of men don't anymore if they've been through the whole rigmarole
My dad hasn't.
Cancer treatment. Well, there's a new test that's come out recently called the PSMA PET scan. Now, this actually is more for men who have been diagnosed with prostate cancer, or where there's, let me just take a step back. So PSMA refers to something called prostate-specific membrane antigen, and it's found on the cells of prostate cancer. And it can be picked up in a PET scan, which is a nuclear medicine scan. Previously, a lot of the imaging tests that we used to look at where prostate cancer has spread to in the body were not very accurate. So MRIs and a lot other imaging scans, we might know that the PSA was up. And if you'd been diagnosed with prostate cancer previously, then we would be able to say, PSA's up, that can tell us that, there's a likelihood that your prostate cancer has come back. But if we were to do any imaging, we might see signs of where the prostate cancer is, but they're not as accurate as we would have liked them to be. So there's a new test that's been around in Australia for a couple of years now called PSMA testing, and as I said, it's a PET scan. The older styles of PET scans were not fantastic for.
And this is all non-invasive too.
Well, it's mildly invasive in that you have to have a radioactive isotope injected into a vein, and that travels around the body and gets absorbed. It gets taken up by the prostate cancer cells, and it lights up on the scan and it tells us where prostate cancer has travelled to. So for a man, for example, let's say you've got a man who was diagnosed with prostate cancer 10 years ago. And if you've had your prostate removed, then the best sign of whether your prostate cancer has come back is that your PSA is starting to rise again. So what then happens is we can now send you off to have this PSMA PET scan, and it can very reliably show us where the prostate cancer has returned. And the reason we want to know that is that for men who have never had radiotherapy, so there are a number of different treatment recommendations for prostate cancer. You can have your prostate removed, and I have to be honest, because I don't work on the surgical side of things, and I'm not an expert in radiation oncology either. I'm a clinical trial coordinator, so my knowledge is somewhat limited. But you could have your prostate removed, you could have radiotherapy. Those are the main treatments, as well as also hormone therapy. Hormone therapy is sometimes recommended because the hormone in the body that actually encourages the growth of prostate cancer is testosterone.
Oh, right.
So for men who have prostate cancer, it's often recommended that they have a course of hormone therapy, or it can be a lengthy course of hormone therapy. And the side effects of hormone therapy are pretty unpleasant. They can cause depression, people can put on a lot of weight, it really can have a significant effect on people's quality of life. So we want to try and avoid those things where we can, and we also want to avoid giving radiation therapy unnecessarily if we don't have to. So if a man has had their prostate removed and has never had radiation therapy, for example, and let's say their PSA goes up, we know the only thing in the body that gives off PSA, if your prostate's been removed, must be prostate cancer cells. So it's a good indication that the prostate cancer's come back. And we can look at different ways of treating that, but for example, we may want to avoid giving hormone therapy unnecessarily, or we may want to avoid giving radiation therapy to the prostate bed, because that has side effects. It can affect erectile function, it can affect bladder function or bowel function. So it's really important to be able to determine where the cancer is, and this new PSMA test can really help us determine whether the cancer has come back outside of where the prostate used to be, or whether it's come back where the prostate used to be. And there are different ways of treating that, and it's one of the really important things for men is being able to make the best decision for themselves about their treatment if they've had prostate cancer, and whether or not they may want to go on to have a therapy which is going to have side effects which are not going to actually result in a treatment that is going to be beneficial to them. So you don't want to have radiation therapy if you don't actually have any cancer in your prostate bed, for example.
Now, with issues like Alzheimer's, some issues with the eyes, and some issues with prostate cancer, are these things that are showing up because we're living longer? Is that part of the thing? These are some of the things that will come on eventually. It's just we're living really long.
A lot of them are diseases of aging. I mean, cancer, Alzheimer's, and those sorts of things. We've got an aging population, and they are diseases of aging. So, you get a lot of people who promote a lot of the alternative therapies and so on, who kind of jump up and down and say, all of the diseases we're experiencing, it's because of our terrible diet and lifestyle and so on. And to some extent, there is, some truth in that. We are much more sedentary than we used to be, but overall, we have much better nutrition. We're living longer because of that. You look at the paleo diet, for example. If you look back at Paleolithic man, they did not exactly have a very long lifespan, nor did they not suffer from disease. It's just they didn't live long enough to suffer from the diseases that we now see in humans.
But my goodness, could they dance?
My goodness, could they ever?
I mean, really. I mean, because if you're only living to 30, you're going to really cut a rug.
I think you would.
You would not muck about.
I have seen some people in their 90s who can really hit the dance floor. I just want to go back to one thing, though, that I missed about the PSA test, which you actually asked me. The most important thing about PSA testing, and that's where the controversy lies, is that a lot of people are concerned that PSA testing is done too much, and that men who... so prostate cancer generally is a fairly slow-growing cancer.
Yeah, because my dad has a hobby. One of them is going to Aldi, the other one is going to the doctor.
I think there are a lot of elderly people who are like that. That is not unusual. But, there are men who are in different groups, so that you can have a very strong family history of prostate cancer and some who don't. And a lot of it is about identifying risk and ensuring that you have a conversation with your doctor about where you fit into that risk group. So is it worth testing your PSA at the age of 85 when you have no risk factors and then going on to have treatments that are going to, cause you problems where you might be diagnosed with prostate cancer that will, you'll die long before it would ever have caused you any problems. So that's where the conversation and the controversy is around screening using PSA testing.
So at what age should you get any? I mean, would someone in their 20s bother getting a PSA testing?
No, 20s is very, very early. I mean, look, I'm actually, to be honest, I actually cannot remember at what age they do recommend starting it.
Is it like 50 with the bowel?
Yeah, look, I mean, the thing is, it'd be 50s, 60s, but probably 50s would be about the age. And in fact, most of the patients I see coming through on the clinical trials I'm involved in are, anywhere between 50s up to 80s. It's pretty unusual, very unusual to see anyone below the age of 50, but it does happen. Really it's all about risk assessment and having a conversation with your doctor and, just being well informed.
And Jo, what's it like to hang with the skeptics here in Brisbane this time round? You're a veteran of many a conference. You've embarrassed yourself. You've been thrown. You're not allowed back in Perth or Adelaide. You're not allowed. Yeah.
Never. Look, I have to say it's been so lovely seeing the baton handed on to the Brisbane skeptics this year.
They can drink.
I have seen. I was at the welcome thing last night, so yes. And they've really done a fabulous job. Really great speakers and great venue, and it's so lovely being up in sunny Brisbane. So no, it's always wonderful hanging out with a bunch of people who are sort of like-minded. So any of the skeptics events is fantastic.
And just reminding people that just because you, as a career as a nurse, you can get into all sorts of things. You don't end up having to work you don't have to end up working in a ward, or there's nothing wrong with that. You can do lots of different things.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with working in a ward, and in fact some of my most satisfying experiences as a nurse were working on the wards. I absolutely loved it, but I moved on to other things.
The reason I would imagine it would be gruelling is not because of the physical thing or because it's a bad job, but because you're seeing a lot of sadness with people, and that would be wearing on a person emotionally.
It can be. Look, a lot of it is unfortunately because nursing, as in a lot of healthcare, is very, very under-resourced. We don't have nurses I wouldn't say that our pay is grotesque, but I certainly don't think nursing pay is what it should be. And there's huge disparities between, for example, you look at aged care nurses who work in aged care homes who do an amazing job looking after our vulnerable elderly.
And that's very manual too, that job.
Very manual, very exhausting work, and they are paid a lot less than nurses who work in hospitals. But this is the thing about nursing, is that it is such a vast career and a profession which opens up so many opportunities, from working in a nursing home to working on a ward to doing things like what I've done, working in an endoscopy unit and then going on to work in research, working in academia. And in fact, what's really interesting about nursing is if you actually look at some of the work that's been done in research, some of the great intensive care work, a lot of that's been done by nurses. There's been a lot of innovation, a lot of interesting ideas. I mean, look, I've had some criticism of my own profession in the past. I won't say that everything is absolutely fabulous. I'm known to speak up about the fact that there is. I will. There is a lot of woo in some elements of nursing and midwifery as well. It's disappointing when you see nurses who have anti-vax views or who believe in things like therapeutic touch, where the nursing profession is a science-based profession, and unfortunately, I think some of the critical thinking skills that should inform what we do don't seem to always translate into practice.
Okay.
But there are, the nursing profession is massive in any country, and there's a huge workforce out there with very vast beliefs and backgrounds. So it's not entirely surprising sometimes.
And look, it's a very nimble profession too. Tell me, can you on your own flip a king-size mattress?
Oh, well, no, look, I can't flip a king-size mattress, however...
Because that'd be really handy, because that's the kind of thing you have to do as a nurse.
Yeah. No, but I can make a bed with someone in it, which my husband will attest to.
Yeah.
Yes. And what's more is I have taught my husband to do hospital corners, because I'm sorry, if you're going to live in my home, the bed will have hospital corners.
Hang on, now define that again. That's the same as they do them in hotels, isn't it?
That is the same as they do in hotels. Which, well, look, it's very hard to. It requires a video view rather than sound, but it's just a very.
You're talking to a guy here who just puts the fitted sheet on and it goes on top. Yeah.
Well, hospital corners involves. In fact, you know who would be really good at them?
Richard Saunders, because he's such an anal retentive.
Saunders would be really good at them because with his origami skills, I reckon Richard could do fantastic.
Richard Saunders' origami skills, he could make a mean bed. Jo, thank you for talking to us. And by the way, for the visual people, she's wearing a Betty Page T-shirt.
Yes, I am. I am. Thank you very much.
That's great. Well, thanks, Jo, and we'll hope to have you back on the Zone soon.
Lovely. Thank you, Maynard.
How much truth is there to claims of risk caused by the treatment of beef cattle with antibiotics? I'm Tamara Robertson, and you're hooked up to the feeding tube.
The Feeding Tube is the web video series that brings you the real facts behind popular food myths. Food woo is the most pervasive pop pseudoscience out there right now, and it desperately needs debunking. Each 3-minute episode is suitable for general audience and is produced by scientists for everyone. The Feeding Tube. Check it out. feedingtube.tv. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone, and if you ever invite Jo Alabaster to your place for a party, make sure she brings some peanut butter slice. Oh. I'm still recovering. In a nice way, of course. In a very nice way, of course. Coming up on next week's show, another Maynard interview. Maynard's going to be speaking to Dr. Mel Thompson, who gave a wonderful talk at the Australian Skeptics Convention, a passionate supporter of science and reason in the health spheres. I think you'll want to tune in. Do you tune into a podcast or do you just download it? I think you'll want to download it and tune in for next week's episode with Maynard speaking to Dr. Mel Thompson. Thank you to those people who have been supporting the Skeptic Zone by buying some Mr. Cat's origami jewellery. www.skepticzone.tv. There's a link there if you scroll down a little bit. And thank you to those people who send letters to Fred the Cat. Fred the Cat. Let me see if he's just outside the door. There he is. He's just walking beside. Oh, no, he's gone round. Fred, do you want to say hello to the Skeptic Zone fans? Yes, he is a cat. I think he's going to make up his own mind about this. Come on. He's sitting on the floor under a chair, looking at me as if I've lost my marbles. He might be right. Oh, well, for this week, this is Richard Saunders and Fred the Cat, signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for contacts, an archive of all episodes since 2008, and our online store. Please support the Skeptic Zone by following us on Twitter @SkepticZone, liking us on Facebook, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can also show your support by subscribing via PayPal for as little as 99 cents a week. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics Inc. or any other skeptical organisation.